How do we look at the 17th century from a modern perspective?
Confusing, I think, is about the best way to put it. I think that from a 21st century perspective, looking back at the 17th century, you need to be ready for a wild ride in terms of society, religion, development of technology, the idea of you being the center of your own world as well is quite a modern concept. But actually having a look back at it all those years ago and thinking about how the religion of those people developed and their selfish ideology, we can basically see that a little bit in modern day society, but it's not as paramount in terms of what we consider our own self-worth. But it's definitely a period of time that, you know, once you sit down and start to realize it, there are parallels, especially with the 20th century. And there's parallels with the idea of you wanting to better yourselves and improve yourselves and wanting something that, you know, before you leave this world, you've made a difference, you've made a change. And I think the idea of the 17th century, these things really come to the forefront. Long gone are the days of the serf in the field. Very much the idea of having a look and realizing that you are better than what you were, better than where you came from. And society in that time is something that develops rapidly, I think, when you get to the Civil War period, but then does kind of take a step back with the Restoration, but then continues to grow through the 1688 and William and Mary period, but definitely driven by the aristocracy towards the end, whereas the middle period's very unique in its revolutionary thought and ideas. So when we look at the 21st century, I always say I think we've gone backwards a little bit politically. I think, you know, we're not as proactive as the people were back then, but the idea of self-worth and individualism is very much prevalent in that time. Absolutely.
Do you think human beings have to be selfish in that sense?
I think if you look at some people at that time and what they did to claim fame, they were extremely self-orientated. Yes, they drove themselves and they disguised it by their belief in God. I don't want to call him out straight away, but you look at Oliver Cromwell. I mean, he was a man that went to Ireland to sort them out after the 1641 rebellion, only to then say, you know, the Catholic faith is worse than, it's a religious power, it's a religious force, it needs to be crushed. Why? That's his personal belief. If you had Catholics in England, they were very much like neighbours a lot of times. People would distinguish between quiet and fractious Catholics, and then all of a sudden you've got to go to Ireland and kill them all. That, to me, is the issue that we have there in terms of the selfish attitude of some, and then others like Colonel Harrison, who believes that Jesus will rule for 1,000 years with his saints, only wants, you could argue, the execution of the king to push forward that new kingdom from the fifth monarchist point of view. So yeah, I mean, self-worth is paramount. Absolutely. Yeah.
Explain Colonel Harrison's rise to fame in regards to individualism.
So, I mean, he starts out, doesn't he, as a son of a butcher, I think in Staffordshire, and he feels that his belief is going to take him to the next step. He feels like he is going to produce something amazing. He hears of this cult, the fifth monarchists, and believes in what they push forward, and he believes that his power is in his own hands. He believes that he has his own cause in his on his execution. He shouted at to say, "Where's your good old cause now?" when he's basically being torn limb from limb when they hang, drawn and quarter him. But he is determined. He feels that the monarchy is something that is unearned. He feels that it needs to be removed. He feels like it is for the greater good. But he has selfish orientation within that as well. He has his own self-worth to climb up through that ladder. He has his own perspective in terms of what he feels and the way that he drives his beliefs, not just onto other members of the NMA, but Cromwell's totally aghast by his thought process and the way that he is. He feels that he is a little bit too extreme. So again, you can see that self-worth driving itself through all the grandees of the NMA and their belief in the New Model Army and their growth of religious belief. And I think that's really important for to understand that, you know, Thomas Harrison came from nothing. But not everybody rises up through the ranks in the 17th century. I mean, what makes him so important compared to anyone else? Why is he the one that drives that belief? Why is he the one that gets to the top of the chain to basically sign the death warrant of a king? That, to me, is a real game changer in the idea of what they're doing in that time and the way that they are delivering themselves as individuals and the way that they are pursuing something different. And they're not part of a great chain of being, you could argue. They want to go up through it. And this has not just been the case of people from the 17th century. It started in the Elizabethan reign. It started to go up in the 17th century. And that sense of how Protestant we want to be as a nation is driven by self-ambition. And Colonel Harrison is a good example of someone who really is somebody who can promote themselves up through the social scales and be highly successful.
I do like that idea, though, about like accountability with individualism. So you just brought up his execution, for instance.
Yeah.
Where's your cause now? He associated with himself. That is his choice. It's that accountability for one's actions that's really taken to an extreme in that period, which fascinates me. He is literally, he's dismembered effectively for public spectacle.
Yes.
What's the importance of probably the blood gore in terms of how we see 17th century society?
So, I mean, I think that's more of a cast back to the rule of law of kings. And if you look at the blood gore, I mean, if you go to the beginning of where you get that growth of Puritanism in the beginning of Charles's reign, during his personal rule between 1629 and 1640, that you know, the Puritans are very angry that they can't get what they want. They can't have a parliament. They feel that they have been let down. They feel like they're being taxed too much. And, you know, you get people that are hugely opposing to this. So you get Prynne, Burton and Bastwick that have all their ears cropped. So that's the bloodlust there. It's a public spectacle, because that would work before. That would work because you were part of a society. You were part of something where individually you would be maimed so everybody in your society could see that you were trouble. You were an outcast. You were basically a rebel. When you get the restoration of the monarchy in 1660, and you remember that actually, they needed to have some people to take the blame for the whole revolution, the whole idea of what was happening. It wasn't the Thomas Fairfaxes of this world that got executed. He had to buy the king racehorses, didn't he, to get out of it, which was convenient. But if you have a look at people like Colonel Harrison, who had actually grown up through the beginning, he'd actually dared to betray the social idea that and become an individual, become that individual compared to everyone else, and therefore he was given the most humiliating death possible, to be hanged, drawn and quartered. And not only him, John Cook as well. Remember the lawyer, a self-made man that prosecuted a king. He really angry. He realizes which the direction of the trial is going, and says, my favourite words in English history, you know, the king must die and the monarchy must die with him. And that is again an individual looking at society and thinking to himself, things need to change. Things need to be different. I might not be comfortable with the way that they're going, but they have to go in this direction. It's for what they want all the way through in terms of their ability to prosecute and to successfully execute a king. Anybody that stands in the way of that is removed, like John Downes at the trial in 16, when he says, "Are we not men?" to Cromwell, and basically it's taken off to a back room, and what the heck are you doing, man? Calm down. And then he doesn't come out for the second half. So anybody who's that individualised to go back to the way that they came from is gotten rid of. But those that want to go with basically the direction of what it is, continue along this road, and John Cook and Colonel Harrison are the ones that are hang, drawn and quartered, as well as people like Daniel Axtell as well, who is also a soldier in the NMA calling for the death warrant of a king, individualising, breaking away from that chain of beings that was so vital for 17th century society at the beginning of the century to this one now, where it just seems to be individualised idea. And I think the blood gore comes from the idea of putting those people into line.
Is that where modern society, in your view, goes backward? Is that when we don't give in to those individualistic...
Yes, that to me is the issue that we have. We all like a good rant on X or Twitter or what it's called now when we see something that we don't particularly like. We want to fill out petitions. We want to do that. We don't demonstrate as much as what we should when something's... we feel that is particularly galling. I mean, and we actually vilify people that demonstrate. I mean, Just Stop Oil are basically vilified because they are saying, let's stop the use of fossil fuels that we know are destroying the planet. But instead of saying, these people have got a point, why aren't we doing that? We're saying, I'm going to be late for my 2:30 meeting. And people aren't getting on board the fact that if we can't breathe the air, there won't be a 2:30 meeting. That's because it's such a long-term effect. Whereas these men in the 17th century, they looked at society and they tried to change it, individualised to begin with, absolutely. But the long-term goal of actually having the privilege of putting people into Parliament, to voting as well. Look at the latest voting statistics as well. Not everybody goes out to have their democratic say. Fewer people had the vote in the 17th century, but nearly all would cast their vote. And they were fighting for people like the Colonel Harrisons of the world that came from nothing, like the Daniel Axtells of this world that came from nothing, to support them so they could go forward. And in terms, they are all the same, and depoliticising themselves in modern times is very different to the 17th century, the idea that you can do good by trying to get involved more politically in modern times is, I think, a little bit of a step backwards in terms of 21st century. I mean, look at the dismemberment, basically, of society. The House of Lords. You go and ask someone on the street the purpose of the House of Lords, I don't think an ordinary working class person would be able to tell you. And I might be stereotypically wrong by that, but I would also argue again that the monarchy is loved in this country. But asked why it's so loved, well, they do. They work hard. They do. They're ambassadors. But what do they do for us as individualised people? People say, they talk about the idea of there being a financial gain to the monarchy. In the 17th century, that financial gain was that they were a drain on society and they were removed. They had a look at it. It needed to change. It needed to change into something that people could be relevant to. And this is why monarchy now is obsessed with popularity, because of this period. If the monarchy is not popular, it doesn't exist.
What is the role of personality then in the 17th century for the monarch?
Well, it depends what kind of personalities, doesn't it? Because we have very different monarchs with very different personalities throughout. I mean, let's take Cromwell out of the equation and just stick to the Stuart monarchs. Mm-hmm. You've got James, who is, and people forget this about James, they're quite harsh about it.
James I, yes.
Yeah, James I, 6th of Scotland. He comes down to this country, very much sees this as a place where he can spend his money, where he can have a different life to that in Scotland, and then he continues to do so. He has a rumoured homosexual relationship with the Duke of Buckingham, amongst others. He is celebrated as a man who would compromise. I mean, there are examples from history where he does compromise. Probably the one that just pops into my head is the Buckinghamshire election of 1604, where he does compromise over a candidate for that particular area. So his personality is very much like, I will compromise, but he compromises for his own ends still. If he doesn't want to do it, he won't do it. He considers himself like King Solomon, pacifus rex, and doesn't want war throughout his period. In fact, actually puts into England some expensive treaties to keep war away from these islands. Whereas his son in Charles, you see a very different, selfish. One of my students years ago, she called him Childish Charles when we looked at him in an A-level class. And to be absolutely honest with you, I can't think of a more apt description. He is childish in the way that he acts towards his belief in the divine right, and he drives the divine right so harsh compared to kings previous to him that is an issue in this time. Even James, his father, realizes he can push, but there's a limit. Charles doesn't engage in that limit. He doesn't.
There's no intelligence in that.
No, he does. I think he's socially and religiously insensitive in that. Even though I love Charles, I think he, like I've said many times, you could give him a 50-50 choice with two guesses and he'd get it wrong twice. But to me, I think he is a man that he has a lot of good qualities as well that people get. He's a loving husband. You know, that gets, is this tyrannical king? Well, yeah, if you're a Puritan living in Ipswich, absolutely he's a tyrannical king. But to his wife, he's loving and caring and a good father. So, you know, what kind of man do you want there? I mean, he basically calls her his heart, you know. I mean, that's really sweet. And you forget that about him. But his drive towards his own end is basically due to his own selfish attitude, you could argue.
Is there a way he could afford that?
Ifs and buts, candies and nuts, isn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, Charles wanted to be a martyr. You know, one of his last points on the stand was, I move now from a corruptible to an incorruptible crown, where no disturbance shall be, no disturbance at all, which, you know, basically proves that he knows it's the end. He knows that he's pushed as far as what he can, and that was it. Remember, he has them running around in his trial, you know, I am the king, what can you do, kind of thing, and then realizes that, well, actually, he might be the king, but, you know, they've got the upper hand here. He doesn't realise that until day 4. But that's what I mean. He's insensitive to a lot of situations, and he's naive. So no, by the end, he accepts himself for who he is and goes to his death as a martyr. I don't think gleefully, I don't think wantingly, but he goes to his death anyway, knowing that, you know, the monarchy does have somewhere it goes to, which is Charles II, who again has a similar personality to his grandfather, James II. Wants to spend money, is in the heel of Parliament, wants to continue to open these places up, but in turn wants to push things in other directions, mistresses, religion, wants to continue to that idea. So you can still see the selfishness of him as much as possible. So Charles II is a king that basically loves himself. He's vain. He's selfish. But he does compromise politically. And that's what makes him acceptable to the political nation in that time. The fact that he will push, but he will know his limit like his grandfather. Whereas Charles doesn't know his limit, very similar to his second son, James II. And you can see these traits coming from each of them over time, that James II is exactly the same as his dad, wants to push for the divine right of kings, wants to be this Catholic monarch, wants to be the victim, and when he's removed, no one is surprised. And then, you know, bringing over of Mary and William just changes that monarchy from something that basically it's whether they're popular or not after the 1688 Glorious Revolution, not that they rule by divine right. It has been removed contractually from them, hence why we get constitutional monarchy after that time.
But isn't it a case when they're founding that constitution where there's more of a case for certain individuals who hold that power at that point that can dictate how this monarchy will go?
You mean the political nation have power that they never had before over the direction of the monarchy?
I'm alluding to several individuals within the political nation.
Yeah, so the Cavendishes of this world and the Danbys of this world, and the
George Savills.
The George Savills of this world, absolutely. So individualise, you get that individual premise of, we want a monarch, because when we didn't have a monarch, we had basically religious rule, especially, and then military rule by you could argue, by the rule of the major generals. They want a monarch because it suits them as well, doesn't it? It suits them, being dukes and particularly earls and something along those lines. They want that power to come directly from the monarchy because, again, it's their ideology. But they want it to be popular. They want it to be popular for everybody, and hence why the Whigs are ecstatic by the time that William and Mary come to the throne, and they can make this contractual ideology that they will serve themselves as well. But William doesn't stick to it. He goes back to the Tories as soon as he can, by I think it's about 1697. So that there is that issue as well. Overall, well, individually they install a popularity monarch, but the Tories aren't going to change that neither, because it suits them as well. It suits the political nation to have a monarchy that is there, that is popular with the aristocracy, because they're the ones that really hold sway now. Whereas James II, you could argue, is our last divine right king, and when he's removed, they replace it with constitutional monarchy. That suits them, absolutely.
Where do the Whig and Tory ideologies come from? We use these words a lot of the time. Well, Whig less so.
Yes, well, the Tory ideology is those that come from the original parties, the court and country elements within Parliament, those that would support the King's ideas without question.
The court ones, yes.
Yeah, absolutely, the court ones. And then the country is more sceptical, but still goes along with it. And it's not until the Glorious Revolution we really start to use the word Tory and Whigs, although they have been around previous to that. But they come more into the idea that, as far as I know, they're insults for each other. The Tories basically is attacking the Irish heritage of a lot of the MPs, Irish farmer, and basically the Whigs is something to do with sheep and bestiality, and we'll leave it there, in Scotland. And that is the reason why they are given these names, that basically it's a label for them to be called out in Parliament at that particular time and to drive change. And if you look at the Whigs, they do sceptically look at the monarchy throughout this time. The Cavendish family, right up until I think 1997, or it might have even been 2000, had a political role in the House of Lords for the Liberal Democrats that they then turned out to be. And the Dukes of Devonshire, who were the Cavendish family at the time, turned around and gave up the seat, said, we shouldn't have a say in modern society, and gave up their seat in the House of Lords because they thought it was time that ordinary people that you voted for should have more of a say than the aristocracy. Again, a very liberal way of looking at that particular period, and that's why they eventually turns into a liberal and conservative attitude from Whigs and Tories respectively, is that they look at society through those ideologies, and that's where they continue to grow to this day, and where you get those ideologies from until the Labour Party came along really in 1924. But that's where you've got those ideas to come from anyway.
Does it really move from that individualistic world to a factionalistic world with the creation of the court and country parties?
Yeah, I think it does. I think that's a good point. I think that when you get the political nation, they are they are always looking for parties. It's the individuals outside of that drive policy, you could argue. But they are the ones that are looking for individual policies. Sorry, the individuals are, but they are looking for some kind of cohesion between themselves when it comes to the different elements within society. For example, when you see the growth of the Court and Country Party, basically after the Civil War, you could argue that the Peace Party and the War Party, the Independents, were the growth of these different elements within it, and they then separated till we got what we would now Liberal and Tory, or Liberal and Conservative elements now. So yeah, those are the elements as far as I'm concerned regarding those factional ideologies. Definitely, I think it's really important that we recognise where those came from, and it is the 17th century. It is the works of Locke. It's the works of Hobbes as well. When we look at those ideas, which are later 17th century figures, so you see those political ideologies as well. I mean, you even get Milton worried about Paradise Lost, don't you? In the literature of that time as well. So that plays a huge role as well of clanning people together over liberal and conservative views of society, whether that comes directly from the aristocracy or from the lower orders later on. It's definitely there until everybody's given the vote after 1918. But through that and the aristocracy that comes from there, that's worthwhile. Remember that it is the 17th century that starts that process off, where we look at society as both liberal and conservative.
Is this quite literally, as Christopher Hill's once called, the world turned upside down?
Yes, when he looks at the Civil War period and he has a look at where it is. Remember, I'll always hear people and they come out with it's never been as bad as this, has it? Never been as bad as this. Well, yeah. You've clearly never looked at your history book. I remember somebody was saying the other day about the riots that we had in Rotherham and other areas, about where people felt that there was an attack upon them religiously, and they didn't feel safe in their own countries, and all this other stuff that had been fed to them through misinformation. Look at the Gordon riots in the 1820s. Well, people saying, you've got... I'm sorry, it might have been a little bit earlier than that. But the Gordon riots, for example, are good examples of Catholics are here. Ooh, we can't have them here, and we've got to have something to say against those. That's exactly the same with the Civil War. They felt that power was being edged away from them. They felt like they could do better than what they were given in their lot, like I said at the beginning. And that was the idea. That was the ideology that drove them. That ideology was the fact of self-betterment that, when you look at that and you look at where you're going from, that's really important for our understanding, when we talk about those factors.
When we look at the Catholics in particular, they always seem to be the enemies, because we're looking for a Protestant England through this period.
Yes.
A whole course to a Protestant England. So what parts of this aspect of looking at Catholics, we've talked about self-betterment, which is a very Protestant thing. You look at Weber in that instance. What about demonising Catholics in this period in terms of actually just vindicative, not just self-betterment for you, but self-quashing for others? How is that dangerous?
I think you've got to look at two aspects here. I think I like the self-quashing ideology when we look at Catholicism overall. And I would say it's not just kept to Catholicism as well. In 1612, this country is home to one of the biggest witch trials that the country has ever seen, in the Pendle witch crisis, that is still got the imagination of today. And if it's boiled down to why those women were attacked, is that they lived in a house that had a matriarchy. Wasn't anything to do with religion. Wasn't anything to do with them as people. It was a society that didn't accept that you could have a matriarchy. And they were persecuted for that. Catholics are different to everybody else in society. So they are all automatically demonized because they are different. They are something that you don't particularly want to get involved with. It's superstition. It's something that you don't want to be involved in. And therefore, but again, it's faceless. And it's easy to be faceless when you start to pick out people in society because you do not know of these people. You've just heard of them. And a lot of hatred springs from that ideology, that it is a group of people that are doing bad in this world, that are faceless, as opposed to the reality of, well, the people that you do that's actually know that's Catholic, they're all right. They don't do any harm. Almost like it's just been built up in people's minds. And that's what's dangerous. Even in the 17th century, when you look at the idea of witchcraft or paganism, Catholicism, it builds this idea of a crescendo to a point where actually you get the gunpowder plot at the beginning in 1605, where you get people that are really angry with the situation of James not putting back on recusancy fines and not giving more rights to Catholics. And by 1678, you've got a man making up things in Titus Oates that, because he makes them up, everybody believes him. Because it's faceless. Oh, I know these people that's been doing this. Edwin Colburn's one of them. He didn't just guessed a name. He was right. And then before you know it, we've got a whole Catholic conspiracy going off again. That's what's dangerous, is that people get taken in by things that they don't want to understand, or they don't want to care about, or they don't want to get involved with. It is just easy to blame and walk away. And history is full of good examples, horrendous examples of where somebody has said, oh, they're to blame. And actually, it's deeper than that. It's deeper than face value. But unfortunately, that ideology is popular because it's an easy out. It's an easy way to explain why you're not doing so well. It's an easy way to explain what's happening. And it's an easy thing to get involved in, as opposed to, well, actually, what have I done to make my life better? What have I done to go from there? And people they always get suckered in by it.
Isn't that then a paradox of what we just talked about in the individualism? Because you've turned into factions then.
Well, exactly. Yes, exactly. When you talk about the paradox, but there is a big difference from what they were looking at society to change it from those individuals, whereas they weren't blaming a group of society with no proof. They were looking at individuals that were trying to change society that was going to be problematic to them. There was more of a factual backup to what they were actually saying. Charles was changing the church to a more Arminianist point of view. Yes, was trying to change the church to this more Catholic belief than what it was. That he had a Catholic wife, he had something, and still, if you look at what they put out about him, there was a lot of propaganda and lies, like the army from Ireland that eventually came over because they put him into a corner. Not the first time round when he was dealing with Ormond in Ireland to begin with in the First Civil War, but eventually he went to a Catholic Irish army, or tried to, but got ignored. It was what directly that affected them from that point of view. It was the things that they were looking, but they weren't looking at society in a way that they wanted to change it for. There were individuals that wanted greater betterment of their own beliefs, as opposed to the persecution of a section within society.
Going back to Titus Oates, a very particular case. It shuts down the state at one point, doesn't it? Yeah,
it does. And I implore everybody just to have a little of a 5 minutes just to think about Titus Oates. I remember mentioning it once to my father. He said he was a good racehorse. So there we go. That's where the name lives on. But yes, Titus Oates was, for want of a better word, another one who was, I think, was a bit of a narcissist, to be honest with you. He basically sat there and, I'm not being taken notice of enough, and therefore I'm going to guess 200 names and hopefully one of them will hit, and it does. And what's really interesting is not him doing that, but how seriously he's taken. That's the idea that, oh my God, we are going to get another Catholic monarch coming. There must be plots. There must be something happening. There must be something that we need to control here. And it goes from something that is, well, made up to something that comes with very poor evidence that gets nearly, I think it's about 15 men murdered and executed because of it. So
and Oates gets rewarded for this.
He gets a pension and a nice house. So there we go. He absolutely does. He gets thrown back in the Tower of London again when James II becomes king. But when William and Mary come back, he's back into his nice house with his nice pension again, because he's a Catholic hunter. But yeah, I mean, he's incredible, to be honest. And I don't mean that in a good way. I mean, he's incredible in a very negative way. He's just, how he got it. I mean, there are people in this world that can talk the talk and confidence, and he must have been one of them. Simple as that. For him to do what he did in the way that he did it, absolutely.
Pretty wild.
Yeah, absolutely.
Going back to William and Mary, what is it about them as monarchs that made the constitutional monarchy so successful?
I'm going to spin it on his head here. I don't think they did make it successful. I don't think William knew what was happening, to be honest with you. A lot of times he sat there saying, can I do this? Can I do that? And Parliament's like, yeah, go on then. We'll let him off. It's the driving of those political factions to begin with that makes the monarch popular, because they're the ones that saying, actually, power is with us now. It's not with the divine right of kings. It's through the popularity of the people that's in charge of the monarchy, which is Parliament. Kings are not, the Parliament sits still in the king's name. That even to this day it still does. But there's rules now. The rules are that there's a constitutional monarchy. That's where the power is. The monarchy doesn't really want to get involved in day-to-day political activity. They were the ones that were pioneers that turned around and said, well, actually, we're going to leave the country to people who know better than us, the running of it, and we'll just take a stipend from the government to keep us mouths shut and make us in charge of the army and go from there. And to me, this might be a little bit conspiracy. It's no coincidence that they go for a German-speaking monarchy after that, because they're in the same boat. It gives time to the idea to think, actually, what English do you know, George, after this? And he knows absolutely nothing, and therefore they're again at the mercy of Parliament. It's beneficial for Parliament.
Plus his religion too.
Absolutely. It's beneficial for the religion and the fact that they're sat there thinking, well, what's happening? I don't really know. Well, just sign this and you'll be fine. All right, I get that. Done. And that to me is why the monarchy has endured as much as what it has, because people feel like that they have some kind of ownership of it. It's done well through the fact that people feel that they can relate, strangely. And that's fantastic if people think that, to be honest with you. I think if they want to go down that route, they can do. I'm less inclined to go down that route. I think that monarchy's had its day, but it's something that I'm in the minority of, and in a democracy, the majority wins.
Do you think that has a lot to do with the popularity of the monarchy, with the fact it's not even codified?
Yes, I think people don't really know what goes into it, neither. An uncodified constitution, it kind of favours the writer rather than the reader. We have this succession bill from 1707, and basically we changed that in 2010 to make a girl has the same status as a boy when it comes to inheriting the throne. 2010? Really? I mean, with what happened in the 1960s and 1970s, surely that'd be something that should have done years ago. But 2010, it just seems a little bit out of date for me. But again, I think they look at things as a social norm a bit slower, because then people can turn around later. Well, at least they're changing. At least they're doing the best that they can. At least what we go from then. And again, if we go back to the 17th century, you've got a king in Charles just putting forward what he believes is right, and he loses his head for it. Whereas people aren't, oh, well, they're doing the best that they can under difficult circumstances. It's like, why aren't we getting our rights now? That's the difference. That's why I believe we've gone back a little bit politically.
Do you think that these modern attitudes are mainly the offshoots of Tory or Whig?
I think it depends where you go. And I think it's where part of the country you go from. And I think it depends what age you are. And I don't think you can stereotype everybody. I think the country traditionally is more conservative and more Tory overall. I think it feels like keep things as they are. If it's not broken, don't fix it kind of attitude. But I think in other aspects, people want change. They crave the idea of liberal ideologies. They crave the idea of there being a change to how they live their lives and push up that social ladder. Unfortunately, you've got to look at the work of someone like Margaret Thatcher for that. The idea that society doesn't exist. That was one of her famous phrases, you know, the idea of pushing forward the individual to do better for themselves, to want better for their family. And there's no harm in that whatsoever. But we're not all getting there at the same time. We're getting there all individually. And having an individualised society means surely you can pick people off one at a time. Whereas if you all together at the same time and you have that group mentality, does change come from the individual or is it a group mentality? It's an interesting debate either way. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer to that.
Where do you see a parallel in the groups of the 17th century that spur out during the Civil War and after? So like the Diggers, like the fifth monarchists.
Yeah, I mean they were such a danger, weren't they? I mean to Cromwell, the levellers. I mean he had two of them shot. It might have been three. They drew lots. And again, it goes to show that.
What was that, Banbury Mutiny? 1649?
Yeah, absolutely. No, but a bit earlier than that. Might be a bit earlier than that. I know it's. What happens is that Charles escapes after the end of the First Civil War. He's in Hampton Court. They've given him some proposals to look over, the heads of the proposals. This is one from the army.
47, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And he escapes to the Isle of Wight, and then he starts the Second Civil War while he's on an island locked up in a prison cell, which I just think that's brilliant, to be honest with you. That shows you the selfish attitude of him by the end. He really doesn't care.
But also the power of the king still.
Absolutely,
it's not diminished, is it?
Yeah, no, absolutely he's not. He's in such a strong position, really. He kind of blows it by starting the Civil War because he plays his hand. Even if he'd have won, it would have been a brilliant move, but he wasn't strong enough. He should have waited, I feel, till Parliament was not prepared enough, and it kind of turned any moderates against him at that time. I think what's really important is his attitude to himself and where he goes with that in terms of where he feels the Second Civil War is going. But again, that is what Cromwell doesn't want there to be. Problems within his own army. He doesn't want people like Colonel Rainsborough standing up saying the greatest he has much of a life to live as the smallest he, and all this stuff at the Putney debates. He wants people to get behind. We've got a naughty king, and we've got to put him right. That's what he wants. And basically, the levellers are seen as a problem, and the Diggers that come from those are seen as unrealistic and too far ahead of their times. But that's fascinating to me, the fact that we have those ideologies.
Why are they too far away?
Well, the idea that land being taken away from them that should be owned by people is something that Karl Marx comes out with in the middle of the 19th century. They're still the 17th century. The Diggers are saying everybody should have access to the common land. Everybody should have access to grow their fruit and vegetables. Everybody should have the opportunity to have a piece of land, grow what they need, and sell the surplus. That's what we should have in this world. We should help each other to help ourselves. You look at the idea of that today, I can think of the NHS as something that we would have in a similar vein. The welfare state. You pay in just in case it's an emergency to go from there. But that idea of general human kindness, we haven't got that in every Western democracy. I mean, look at the United States of America. They would rather die than have universal health care.
But we've seen it weaponized in other forms as well.
Absolutely.
So with the Bolsheviks in Russia, for instance.
Absolutely. And that's the trouble. They take it to an extreme every single time. And they were dangerous, the diggers in this country, for that belief. And it hadn't just come out of the Civil War. You got a group called the Seekers previously in the 1630s.
Were they all violent? Were all the violent people?
No, they weren't. This is the issue. They weren't all violent. They were just all wanting this idea of a utopian society. They wanted this idea of, for want of a better phrase, the greater good. And that idea of the greater good is okay, don't get me wrong, but initially it falls down by the fact that not everybody is on board with it. And Cromwell needs his army together. He needs army discipline. We have a rogue king that needs to be stopped. We haven't got time to deal with individual rights. So much so that Colonel Rainsborough is assassinated at some point, trying to deal with the Scottish situation because of his level of views, because of his stance trying to bring society together. That is problematic for Cromwell, and he is removed. He doesn't want people telling him how society should be. He wants them, let's deal with the king first, and we can look at this at a later stage. But again, he chooses the godly, the fifth monarchists, when they do get the opportunity in the Parliament of Saints. So, that is problematic for them at that time. They needed unity, and therefore these ideas kind of got lost in history. But they were advanced for their time, absolutely.
What makes the Puritans in particular, when we look at, that godly Reformation, what makes them so different in terms of being, previously revolutionary in going against the monarchy, to being somewhat conservative against people like the diggers?
That's an interesting question. I don't think they are conservative when they go against people like the diggers. I think they are doing it because they see a long-term solution opposed to a short-term change. So getting rid of the diggers at that particular time, or making them less influential, played into the fact that they could come back to this at a later stage in time. I think that was their long-term aim at this point. The whole idea that they were going to come back. The time wasn't right. The time wasn't right at the end of the 1640s. They needed to get rid of the archenemy, which was the king. You get rid of the king, and then they can mess about with all these ideas, because there's not much leveller uprisings after that. They're still knocking about, but their influence is mainly between 1646 and 1649. The Puritan ideology is one of self-betterment through Calvinist belief, the predestinationism ideology, that they're going to get clues in their life of how predestined they are, and that gives them that opportunity to be, in some aspects, a little bit more I want to say radical. They're a little bit more radical in terms, and this is where these ideas come from. And that's what happens, is basically they feel like they can be radical, so they are radical. So they go to extremes with it, and it's not just the levellers and diggers that we can look upon. We can look at the high attainders, or ranters, as they get called as well.
What's a ranter?
So a ranter is someone who believes that God has foreseen everything. They're basically mocked in the 17th century. They are a group of people that are really they're really feared in terms of how they feel like they can go off. I mean, there are reports of them walking around naked in graveyards and not sticking to their marital vows. We'll just say that with several people,
Right.
and they're really shocked. But there is a fear. There is a fear about all of these groups right up until the 1660s. Apparently, there was an incident in Westminster Yard where one of the courtiers is absolutely in panic that the fifth monarchists have re-emerged because a cow has broken in. You know, so this cow breaks into Westminster Yard, and there's hell upon earth, and somebody screams, "The fifth monarchists are rising again." So even those ideologies, the Puritan belief and the idea of it, is particularly frightening for so many in the Anglican middle way, that they are that frightened of them because they seem to have that much power previous. And then, you know, when the monarchy is restored in 1660, if you're looking again, it's the fifth monarchist that's doing this. They take over London, part of London, in 1660 as well. I mean, it's a very good point, really, whether do you actually take over. I mean, if you were thinking of somewhere you want to take over in London, you'd think, oh, you know, St James's Palace with the monarchy, or, you know, the Tower of London. No, they go to St Paul's Cathedral, as you do. So it's well known for its arms and well stocked. And basically they're just randomly shooting at people. You know, it goes on for so long, so much so that George Monk has to come in and suppress them.
Yes, the general.
Yes, General George Monk, who actually part of the NMA, and then he changes to Charles II. He has to go in and sort them out. So, yeah, there is a total change in this time when it comes to monarchy and radical belief and where they come from. So the idea that it's just Puritans, it comes from there, yes, but these groups are too extreme for a lot of Puritans, and hence why Puritanism kind of fades and dies as well. You could argue the fifth monarchists really start to fade and die by the end of 1660 with the execution of Harrison. But Puritanism, it doesn't last much longer.
Realistically speaking, then, are we to look at these groups as models for future extremists? Politically, I think. If only they were that organised. I think what the problem is religiously is that they feel like they want to have a change in society, a rapid change in society. So yes, they tick that box for a terrorist group, you could argue, a radical group within that point of view. But they're not that organised. They have some elements that are organised, but actually once push comes to shove, society is easily able to debunk a lot of what they're saying and what their beliefs and what it is. And therefore that's their Achilles heel. They don't have that conscious cohesion to be anywhere near a threat to the state, and hence why even when Cromwell is in power with his Puritan ideology, when he gives them the opportunity in the Parliament of Saints, it fails. And then he's scratching his heads of what to do. You've got people like Lambert coming up with the instruments of government, who's another general in the NMA. He's got more of an idea, so he goes with his idea. And when that fails, again, he goes to the NMA and says, well, because they're stopping everything. It's the New Model Army as a political force that is the driving point of everything within that time. And yes, it does have political and religious radicals in it. The most successful, you could argue, out of that time are the Quaker group, because they are so peaceful and they don't upset anybody else. And when it gets changed by the later period, they are just a religious bunch of people that believe in peace and love. And that's why they endure out of war and fear and basically religious fanaticism, is the fact that they're the ones that turn around and say,
yeah, we ain't going to last if we keep this model. So let's prove to the world that we are just here to find God through friends and to be good citizens and peaceful citizens. And that leads to the Quaker movement still being around today. Yes, the Baptists are still here. Yes, the Independents are still here. But the Quaker movement is the one that's really of the Puritan ideology that continues to be probably the most well-known and the most successful out of it. I mean, the Cadbury family, for example, were all Quakers as well. So that goes to show that they had that work ethic, that work ideology, that Puritan work ethic that was really, really sought after. But they looked after their staff. They looked after them. They put them in the town of Bourneville, as we know. So that Quakerism is within it, in that factor as well.
Also, going back to that disorganised violence, there's a particular incident that really strikes me in the Venerising, which you mentioned, for the
Yes.
Fifth Monarchists,
Yes.
1660, where one of the Fifth Monarchists is standing outside of St Paul's Cathedral. He's carrying a weapon. Asks a random guy on the street, says, "Who are you for, sir?" And the guy says, a little bit confused, "For the king," because we've still got a monarchy at this point, been restored. And then the next thing, this guy goes and shoots him because he's for the king.
Yeah.
Bizarre.
Absolutely bizarre. But that's what I mean. And that's how terrified the ghost of their ideology lived on. Like I say, when you get a cow breaking in into a yard in Westminster, and everybody's terrified because they think it's the Fifth Monarchists are back, and that is they're still like a bogeyman right until people realise that they're not much of a danger anymore. They're not there anymore. But yeah, the Vener uprising, which I referenced, yeah, absolutely right. Yeah.
Do you think a lot of that comes from that sort of like fear of the unknown? Because you've mentioned like the cow, for instance.
Yeah.
The fact that a lot of human anatomy is only just being discovered, or animal anatomy, etc., nature, and we see a massive scientific revolution towards the end of the 17th century.
Yeah.
So the founding of the Royal Society and other aspects like that, which some scholars believe that it's kind of more of like a hands towards God in that founding.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the idea that you get people like Newton as well in the 17th century and his beliefs, and I mean, scientifically it is a changing century. Yes, there is still the idea of God, but I think by the later period, you have a situation where a lot of the witch trials that were starting at the beginning of the period are put forward down to local disputes rather than the fact these people are actually witches. People start to think with their brains as opposed to their local prejudices. And yeah, I mean, I was reading this morning about the witch trials, the Pendle witch trials, and again, it goes to show just how that was a family feud that turned into all of them losing their lives. I mean, it was seized upon by the local magistrate, the idea that people would curse one another as just something that people would probably do today. They would say people to do unpleasant things, and then you still get that situation now, but it continues to be this idea of, it's not Christian, it's not godly. But by the end of it, people, I think, could realise you can have technology, you can have advancement, but you can also have your faith as well. And they start to become more hand in hand. I heard a really good quote that the scientist and the theologian will come to the same conclusion in the end. What that conclusion is, we won't know until they get to the end. But I like that, and I think people of the 17th century would agree with that.
Well, on that conclusion, thank you very much for coming on, Rob.
Thank you.
If you really enjoyed that, there's some more content down here, but don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.